Right. So I want to welcome you again to the workshop, Listening to Invisible Wounds, a sympathetic approach to working with survivors of trauma. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why this is important later on in the video, in the workshop. Confuse myself. Okay. So who am I and why you should listen to me, and especially on this particular subject? So my name is Joanna. My name is Joanna Daniel, and I am a counselor by profession. We run an online ministry, not so much online anymore, offline as well, where we do retreats, courses, conferences. I'm an international speaker, and I'm also an author. So in terms of our retreats, we do 2 retreats every year, one in May and one in November. Our 3rd annual November retreat is coming up on the 21st to the 24th of November. And yes, it's going to be in Staffordshire, and it's going to be amazing, if I might say so myself. So we have a lot in store for those who come to that retreat and what they will get. Just spare me a minute. Those who come to that retreat and what they're going to be receiving. I think that I want to kind of even out the light a little bit. So why this course, why this webinar this evening, and why there's this burden on my heart? Because as I go around and speak, and as I go, and I've spoken international, as I've said, and it's the same story for the people that I get to speak with, where church or ministries are not able to see or to hear their pain. And what it's causing is a lot of people to become saddened and leave church. They leave the Lord because they don't feel like he understands. Because I mean, we are the only representative of Christ that they have, and when we don't do it in a way that speaks to people where they are, they will not be able to hear us. And so many people have left. Many people are leaving because they don't think that Jesus understands their pain. So that's why that webinar came out of that passion, because after listening to so many people, sometimes it's just like, that's it, I've got to do something about it. What am I going to do? And I spoke about it for about 2 years. For about 2 years I've been speaking about this before I made the decision to do this webinar tonight. So here is what Joyce Huggett says. And Joyce Huggett, she writes an amazing book called Listening to Others, and some other stuff as well around listening. She's really good at it. And she says, people's pain, depression, loneliness cannot be eliminated with a well-meaning response like, turn to Christ and everything will be all right, or a loving, pray about it. And sometimes that's what we say, isn't it? Just pray about it, or if you just come to Jesus, it's going to be okay. And while I believe that Jesus, he heals all of our wounds, because that's what he says in his word, as I said, we're the only representative of him that they have, and we have to do it in a way that will speak to the people and their pain. But first, we have to be able to see their pain. We have to be able to hear it. We have to be able to see it in words that are not said, and read between the lines and all of those kind of things. And hopefully tonight, that's what I'm going to spend the next 60 minutes teaching you how to do. Okay. So she also says that when someone listens, not her that says, this was a question that I wanted to ask. When someone listens to you attentively and lovingly, how does it feel? I just want you to kind of think about that. It's kind of like a rhetorical question. Just how does it feel when someone listens to you attentively and lovingly? And I want you to hold that throughout this presentation, like that feeling that you got when you got gotten, as one of my teachers says, when somebody really gets you, what does it feel like? So I'm going to talk about a few things that we will be learning throughout this evening. So just a few pointers of what we'll learn as we go through. So here's some of the things that we'll learn. You will learn really how to listen. And I thought I was a good listener until I was training and realized that I was rubbish really at it. I was not a good listener. And I'm going to tell you why sometimes, and the kind of things that gets in the way of us listening and really hearing what people say. We're going to learn how to listen to past pain. And we're going to also learn how to listen to the heart. Okay. I'm going to learn how to listen to the heart and how to listen to past pain. So that's some of the things that we're going to learn. We're going to also talk a lot about compassion and how to really show compassion and why it's important to listen, and how just listening on its own is just something amazing that happens when somebody just takes the time to listen and to connect with you, and how deeply that will meet the needs of people and how deeply that will serve them. So I asked this question in my 300 plus people in my Facebook group. I think I asked it about a couple of months ago. I asked this question: what do you wish your pastor or ministry leader or church elder, or, you know, the people in leadership in your church or in the ministries that you attend, what do you wish they knew about how to help you with trauma? And these are some of the responses that I got. A prayer doesn't always work. Forgiveness doesn't mean I'm not still hurting. I would like them to learn how to listen to me better. So you see that there's an emphasis on listening. I want them to learn how to listen to me better. And they wanted confidentiality to be maintained. So what you tell them cannot be the content of the next sermon. So those were some of the things that they talked about. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into what is trauma, what is childhood trauma. And I'm not giving so much of a definition as to explain what that is and how the people in your congregation will show up when they have these symptoms, because it doesn't show on the outside. So how are you going to see it in order to do something about it? So there was a study done a couple of years ago by the Center for Disease Control in the US, and they studied over 17,000 adults, and they wanted to look at this particular group of people experiences of trauma in their childhood and how that shows up itself in terms of adult life, and how does it affect health. Okay, so there were 10 categories that they look at. They looked at childhood abuse, they looked at physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. They looked at neglect, emotional neglect, and physical neglect. They looked at, dysfunction in families, such as substance use, parental separation or divorce, depression, parental mental health, especially I say especially undiagnosed mental health, because I feel like undiagnosed mental health can have such an adverse reaction effect on children. So there was depression, mental health, domestic violence, or a family member that was in prison. So those were the areas that they look at. I want to say something around domestic violence really quickly, because when this is in a family, and sometimes maybe in ministries or in churches, you might talk to a child where there's abuse in a home, or you may know the parent who is experiencing the abuse, the mom usually, although not women are not the only ones who experience abuse, but 99% of the time it is women, and male the perpetrator. So you may be talking to a woman who has experienced abuse and their children in the household, and you may be praying with her, or you may be, the person that she comes to talk to, and you listen. But just know that the children who live in that home is experiencing, it's traumatic for them. So they're classed in childhood trauma. Okay, especially, and I say especially the ages 0 to 7, the developmental stages, because when a woman is in an abusive home, she cannot be emotionally available to her children and also cater to the needs of the abuser. So there's a really tricky balance going on there. Anyway, so those were the areas that the Center for Disease Control looked at. And so what I did was, you say, for example, if I'm working with someone one-to-one and I'm doing this scale with them, it was 1 point for each item, each abuse, each item on this list. So say, for example, a person lived in a home where there was domestic abuse. They were emotionally neglected. The parents turned to alcohol to cope, and father went to prison. So that person would have experienced 4 adverse childhood experiences. Or the person who was sexually abused, they were neglected by their parents, their mom and dad divorced, and there was some emotional neglect as well. So that person would have experienced 4 adverse experiences. I want you to really hold that in mind and bear that in mind. Okay. So there was 1 point for each chosen category. As the number goes up, you have an increased risk of heart disease, chronic lung disease, liver disease, obesity, STDs, HIV, and the list goes on. Depression and anxiety, suicidal ideation, and on the list goes as the number goes up. So I list out 4 things that if somebody experienced those 4, so say for example, somebody who experienced 5, sometimes people have experienced 6 of these adverse childhood experiences. Can you imagine? So these are the people that come to church that you are ministering to every day, because the research shows that 1 in 4 of us would have experienced sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse, 1 in 4. So if you have a group of, say you work with young people and you have a group of 10 young people, a quarter of them will have experienced adverse childhood experiences, in particular sexual abuse, or know someone who would experience sexual abuse. That's a massive percentage. So we really need to know how to spot the signs and what to do about it. Now, I'm not saying you're going to counsel them. Bear with me. But I want us to become aware of some of the ways that people show up because of the stuff that they've experienced and how we can minister to them. Because as I said earlier, these folks believe that Jesus can't help them by and large. Recently my husband and I went to a church, and it was just by accident because we'd gone to pick the children up and we went to this church. We'd been there once before because of the same reason. And we saw this young man that the last time I saw him was a year ago. His face was radiant. He was looking sharp and, just joyful. And he was telling us about his experiences and the things that he was doing. And then we saw him that day when we went to that church, and his face wasn't joyful. His face was, it was almost like, if you're in the light and the light turns down. For example, you can see me now, but if I do, if I kind of block the light, I get, dull. It's not as bright. That was how he looked. And I remember seeing him, and we sat in the same pew, and I saw his face, and I kind of just registered it, but didn't really dwell on it. And then this week, my husband said, he called me because he wanted to talk to me that day, but he couldn't. So he rang me and he said he's really struggling. He's struggling with suicidal thoughts. He's struggling with his family, and he's struggling with a number of things, and he didn't know how to cope. I knew it. The light turned down. And so he's on this course, and what they've done is sent him home because he's not coping. So there was no help put in place. And this was a course run by a church. Okay. There was supposed to be resources in place to help him or point him in the right direction, but they sent him home because he's not coping. So we have to be able to, and I think if we don't act fast, we're going to lose him. And the way he came to Christ, we really cannot lose him. And I mean, we're not losing him, and he is going to lose out, but we have to act really quickly to show that Jesus has everything that he needs, but it's going to be dependent on how we do it. So 1 point for each category, as I said. The greater the number of early childhood exposure, the greater the risk of early adult disease and death from any cause. Isn't that amazing? Death from any cause. Many chronic diseases that adults have are determined in childhood, not by disease, but by events in your childhood. I want you to really look at that again. So some of the chronic disease that adults have in their adult life now are determined because of what they experienced in childhood, not by disease, but by the events in their early childhood. The suppressed emotional trauma has to find expression, and it comes out in all shapes and forms. So people who suffer adverse childhood trauma have a shorter lifespan than those who don't. People who suffer adverse childhood experiences die 20 years earlier than everybody else. 20. That's massive. We're going to talk about suicide later on. So I want to dive into learning to listen. And how do we do that? How do we listen to people who are experiencing having these experiences? So we learn to listen first by listening to the silence and by active listening. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. Here's another quote that I read from Joyce that I felt was really appropriate for now. She says, "Those who do not run away from our pain, but touch them with compassion, bring healing and new strength." That's fantastic, isn't it? Those who do not run away, but touch us with compassion brings healing and new strength. So just by you learning how to listen, you will have a massive effect on somebody who's going through some stuff. And sometimes they don't even know how to talk about it. So listening to the silence, the kind of silence that means that you're not doing the shopping list in your head. You're not thinking about what to make for supper. You're not planning a meeting. You're not doing anything but just sitting in silence with someone. This afternoon, my daughter and I went for a walk. And my daughter, though she's a twin, is very different to her brother. As an introvert, silence, well, I learned how to be silent with a client, but generally, we're not talkers. We're not big talkers. And my daughter is like that too. So we went for a walk and we were holding hands, walking down the lane, and we were quiet. And I just noticed the silence between us, testing it to see if it's uncomfortable or were there unspoken words that none of us wanted to say. And it was really a comfortable silence. And I smiled to myself because I thought if I was walking with a brother, it would be so different. I'd be answering 100 questions and chatting away at something. But that kind of silence that was comfortable, and we just walked hand in hand for most of the way, silent and connected still. That's the kind of silence that we have when we learn to listen, really listen deeply to people. When they can say something and we can sit there with them until they're ready to say the next thing. Or we can sit in silence while they cry until they finish crying. We have to be comfortable enough with it, with people crying, to not try to stop them from crying. And so we stop them from crying by hugging them, by giving them tissue, by patting them on the back and say, it's going to be okay. We're going to pray for you. And we think, all of those things are not bad. But when somebody's crying, what they really want is for you to sit across from them and just be present with them in that moment, in that uncomfortable place, and let them cry it out. Okay. We don't want to stop them when they're crying. All right. So listening to the silence, listening to, when somebody says something to you and then they're silent and then there's a sigh or the facial expression. We're going to talk some more about the body language, but sometimes the silence are so heavy with unspoken words. If we listen to that, you can use active listening to draw some more out of the person. Okay, so they're silent, but there's a heaviness that you can feel. So you can reflect that back and said, you know what? I know that, you're not saying anything, but I can sense that there's so much that you want to say, but maybe you don't have words. Yeah. Or you can reflect on your ability to speak in that moment with the heavy silence. Like you can say, it feels like there's so much I want to say, but I don't know what to say. What would you like me to say? Right. Or just sometimes, especially if you're listening to somebody who's bereaved, sometimes just sitting there, not saying anything is enough. And they really remember that you came and that you just sat and you didn't say anything. And that, every now and again you would, if you, before you leave, you'd pray, or you'd ask them what they needed. Would they like something to eat? Or especially if the death was traumatic and it was the first couple of days, first couple of hours, when they're still in shock. Listening to silence for somebody who had experienced childhood trauma, as I went through the list earlier. And the person, sometimes depression is a feature of people who've experienced childhood trauma. Anxiety is also a feature. People have panic attacks. I sat beside somebody one day in church while they were having a panic attack, because I noticed that they did a special item and they wouldn't stop shaking. And I thought, that shaking is lasting too long. It's okay, you're nervous sometimes after you sat down, but the nervousness was lasting like a couple of minutes. and that was too long. So I went over and I sat beside them and I said, just breathe. Taught them some grounding techniques. We're going to teach these at our retreat in November. Taught them some, just say breathe, keep your foot level on the ground. You can make sure your foot can, is grounded. You can feel the chair. You can feel the bench that you're sitting in. Take deep breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Expand your stomach as you breathe and calm them down. And it took a good couple of minutes. And at the end, I was tired. And I said to her, I am exhausted. I wonder how you feel. And she said, this one was short. Usually the panic attacks last longer. There were other people around, but they hadn't noticed. So you have to be, and I wouldn't say you have to be a trained counselor to be able to see it. You just have to love people and is in tune with the Holy Spirit and ask him to show you people who are struggling, and he will show you them to you. So those are some of the things that you can do. Or if the person's having a panic attack in church, you just sit there with them and help them to breathe. Just breathe with them. And they kind of model your breathing, your calm, steady breathing as you sit there peacefully with them. Now for active listening is you're listening and you're there and you're present. So that's why I'm saying listening with silence means you're not doing any planning in your mind. You're not shopping. You're not gone off having a conversation with anyone. You're not thinking about what you can say next. You're just being present. And your whole body and mind is present. While you're present, when you're active listening means that when somebody said something to you, you can repeat it back to them. So you paraphrase what they say just to check that you've heard them correctly. So if somebody said to you, for example, a woman who is always well dressed, always smiling, always serving, her husband's charming, and she said to you one day, Joanna, my husband's emotionally abusive. So maybe they won't say it like that, but they might say something that hint that something is not right. Like, he has a temper. He's not so calm, and they'd laugh. Active listening means that you let them know that you hear what they say. Are you saying your husband has a temper? So you're repeating what they say. Yeah. And they'll say, yes, he has a temper. And you'll say, but you said that, but you laugh. But I can sense that because we're going to talk later on about body language. You're now seeing the sad eyes. You're seeing the smile that's not really a smile because it's not reaching the eyes. And you're seeing that maybe shoulders are tense. And you're seeing so much about the body language that tells you that her husband has a temper, but it's not all fun and games. Yeah. Or there might be something on the news and somebody says, oh, that happens to me. That happened to me, Or the young person that tells you something and said, so you paraphrase what they say. So you repeat what they say to them. So they know that you've heard that. That's your way of demonstrating that you've heard them, right? You also comment on the tone that they use, the tone of voice that they use. So that's active listening. You comment on the tone that the person used. You will also reflect on the fact that, check with how you feel when they say it. Do you get angry? Did you feel sad? Did you feel, what did you feel? Reflect that back to them and said, when you said that, you smiled, but I felt really sad when you said that. And then they might smile again. One woman told me when I was training, a woman said to me, she said she was married for 25 years. And she said, my husband had never given me any money for that 25 years. And she laughed. I was uncomfortable because I knew the husband. So I was really uncomfortable when she said that. And I didn't say anything. I quickly asked another question because I was uncomfortable. And so when they were giving me my scores, the evaluator said, she said something really important that you missed. She said her husband had not given her anything for 25 years. He'd never given her money to shop or to do anything. And she laughed, and you didn't say anything to that. Now, I didn't say anything because I was uncomfortable. So when somebody says something to you, and on the outside, it doesn't look it doesn't match up with what you can see on the outside. Remember, this is about invisible wounds. It doesn't match up with what you can see on the outside. Check in with how you are feeling, because that will help you to listen effectively. Check in with how you're feeling. Ooh, how do I feel about that? Do I feel, and I'm not saying judge if they're right or wrong, because that's not our place, but check with how you're feeling. Is it uncomfortable for you? Is it somebody that you know that you can't believe they'd ever do anything like that? Is it, do you feel like they're complaining? Do you feel like this person is annoying because they always complain? They're a complainer. Check in with what's going on for you. Are you feeling irritated? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling angry? What's going on for you? Okay, check in with that. So I know I've kind of said a paragraph when I wanted to give a list, but the list is paraphrase what they said, summarize it, check in with what they said just to make sure that you get them right. So repeat it back to them to make sure that you understand what they say, and check in with how you're feeling and reflect that. Like, I felt sad when you said that. I felt a little bit angry when you said that, just to see, just to check, because sometimes that will make people say a little bit more, and you can know where to signpost them in terms of appropriate services. Okay. Next thing is listening to past pain. Listening to past pain. I feel like I've gotten here really quickly, like I've skipped some of my slides. Listening to past pain. So we talked about childhood trauma earlier on in our talk about childhood trauma, and sometimes people might feel, and maybe you've heard this before, maybe you've said it before, like, that happened when you were a child, you just need to forgive and move on. The thing about that is, when we've experienced childhood trauma, when we've experienced challenges in our childhood, even though we grow up, the pain doesn't, because events that have an emotional connection get stored in the brain. So we grow up, but our brains, they kind of come with us, and the events are stored there, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. So what people do, what we normally do, especially when we're children, is suppress it, suppress it, suppress it. And as we grow up, we suppress it some more, we suppress it some more. And remember, I talk about chronic health conditions. Sometimes it comes out in some health conditions like autoimmune illnesses. It comes out in, some of the different illnesses that I named earlier, because repressed pain must find expression. Anything that we press is going to come out some way, somehow. Sometimes it comes out in behavior, especially if you're looking at the teens, and sometimes, we're told that teens are problematic, and, when they're this age, the young people we hear. It comes out in behavior. Really quickly, I shared this to a group recently, because I saw it in a group that I'm in Facebook, that talks about, I'm going to call him Johnny because I've forgotten his name. They said on Monday, Johnny threw a chair because his father didn't pack a drink with his lunch. And when he was having his peanut butter sandwich, it stuck to the roof of his mouth, and he had to use his tongue to get it out, and everybody else had a drink. So Monday, Johnny threw a chair. On Monday, Johnny threw a chair because when he got to PE, he noticed that his sister had forgotten to pack his socks, and he had to use his father's socks, which was really long, and it was falling down all the time, and it was irritating for Johnny. So on Monday, Johnny threw a chair. On Monday, Johnny threw a chair because he thought he had his homework. He was sure he put it in his bag, but when he was checking, it wasn't there. So on Monday, Johnny threw a chair. They said on that Monday, they were asking people, what did you do during your holidays? I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember all of it altogether. They were asking people, what did you do for your holidays? Johnny didn't want to talk about it, because when everybody else was having fun, Johnny was saying goodbye to his mother. So on the Monday, when Johnny threw a chair, on the Saturday before the Monday that Johnny threw the chair, he was burying his mom. So Johnny buries mom on Monday. On Saturday, on Monday, he went to school, and it was just all too much for him. And so he was throwing the chair. But all people saw was the chair whizzing through the air. They didn't see everything else. Okay? So that's what invisible wounds look like. That's how sometimes it will come out. Sometimes it's the adult. Johnny has grown up, and he's now a 35-year-old man on the board, and he's aggravating, and he's the one that annoys everybody, and he doesn't communicate very well, Or Johnny might be Jane, who is really angry all the time and prickly or sad and withdrawn. All kinds of things might be going on for Jane because there were many Saturdays in her life that she's repressed, but she's coming to church, she's joining your ministry, she's in your women's ministries group, and she's at this retreat because she really wants something to touch the sadness of all those Saturdays that is buried inside. Okay. And that's where we come in. And that's why I'm so glad that you're here tonight, because you're wanting to learn how to see her. Because when you see her, it's going to be life-changing for her. Because this kind of seeing is not about telling. It's not about giving scriptures. It's not about saying, I'll pray for you. Even I'll pray with you sometimes. That's effective and it has its place. But it's sitting with, standing beside, walking in their shoes, going the long distance with them. Even when chairs are whizzing through the hair on Monday, that you can see that that person, they have had many Saturdays, and I'm going to stay beside them because of that. And that is what's going to tell them that Jesus loves them. That's what's going to tell them that when he says, I'll heal your wounds and restore health unto you, the relationship that you're going to be developing with them is going to tell that story like no scriptures that you could give them ever will. Because the scriptures is going to come alive through what you do. And that's how it becomes effective. So listening to past pain mean being able to see the Saturdays that people are coping with, that people have coped with for 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, and it's just too much now. And you met them on a Monday, and you're going to meet them on many Mondays. Okay. And they're going to need you to speak to them. Here is what Joyce Huggett says. She says, the paradox is that, she says, those who do not run away from our pain, but touch them with compassion, bring healing and new strength. She said, the paradox is that the beginning of healing is in the solidarity with the pain. When you can sit beside the Jane and the Johnny that have many Saturdays and you meet them on a Monday, when you can sit alongside them, that's what brings healing. And for you to partner with God in doing this compassionate work, it's just so rewarding and fulfilling. It's the most fulfilling thing that you'll ever do. She says, wanting to alleviate pain without sharing it is like wanting to save a child from a burning house without the risk of being hurt. I don't know how you feel about that one, but when I read that one, that was exciting for me, because you cannot alleviate pain without getting hurt. And when I say getting hurt, I mean not being hurt by the person, but I mean, being solidarity with them, like feeling their pain and being able to respond to what you feel and be able to go the journey with them, the distance with them, to stay with them, to never leave them. Okay. And that's what showing Jesus looks like. That's what being able to say, I can see you. I see you. And because I see you, I'm staying. That's what it looks like. People who are in pain often has a shield, especially people who have experienced past pain. I say especially past pain, but people who are in pain have a shield. They protect themselves. So you might meet them on Sunday. The pain happens Saturday, you meet them on Sunday, and they're shielded up, they're kitted up, they're hiding behind a shield. And sometimes we give up when people are behind their shield. We give up because we feel like it's too frustrating. I cannot get through to this person, so I'm going to give up. But here is what it looks like. So from now on, maybe you'll be able to recognize these shields. So people who have experienced pain, here is three things to look out for: shame, PTSD, and some trauma symptoms. I'm going to go briefly through them. So people who are in shame use a shield, like this one. But here's what the shield looks like: people pleasing, anger, and withdrawal. Those are all shields. So people pleasing might be, well, let me do anger first rather. So we all know that person in church who is feisty. They're hard workers, but they can be problematic. That's a trauma symptom, anger. Anger is a trauma response because often anger is a secondary emotion. Sometimes shame is first, fear might be first, or even sadness is beneath all of the anger. So if you think of the person who you know who's feisty and angry, but they can be hard workers, it's anger is a trauma response. So the person who is angry all the time, they might be angry at the children, they might be angry in church, they might be angry, you might be a neighbor, your family member. It's a trauma response. There's many things, many other layers going on underneath. Might be shame, might be fear, might be sadness. Sometimes it's sadness. It was my supervisor that told me that anger is a guard for sadness. So sometimes when somebody's angry, anger wasn't the first thing that happened, it was sadness. But sadness is uncomfortable, and we use anger to protect ourselves. Okay. So that's one shield to look out for. Another shield to look out for is people pleasing. That person who take on more than they can manage, they're often overstretched themselves, and they'll never admit to being tired. So as a person who can see invisible wounds from today, you're going to be able to say, no, brother, so-and-so, you're not doing that job. You can't clean church this week. We are not going to let you lead out in some service. You cannot teach the lesson. We're not going to let you do this. Or no, sister so-and-so, we really need more hands, but you've done enough. Okay. And that might feel like rejection, because when people are people pleasing, sometimes on the back of the flip side of that is rejection. That might feel like rejection for them. So you have to do it in a way that make them know that they're a part of and they're included, but you don't want them to overstretch themselves and to do too much, because it's a trauma response. It's a shield. Okay. They're protecting themselves, because sometimes when we're in shame, we feel it's written across our forehead and everybody can see it. Yeah. Okay. Right. And usually the people who are people pleasing people are the ones that we can depend on, because they need to be needed, and likely will not know how to set boundaries. So you have to have your own boundaries that helps them set theirs. Okay. So here's something that you can do to help them. Psalms 139, when we're listening to people and we can see people pleasing traits, tell them about how God sees them and how he loves them. They're fearfully and wonderfully made. And because you're going to demonstrate that through action, they're going to see it and they're going to believe you. Another shield is withdrawal. Withdrawal, isolation, and loneliness is a trauma response. People withdraw, they might complain, act aloof, but really they want to be seen and they want to be involved. So here's the person who do too much and is over involved and no boundaries, the people pleaser. And here's the next person who really want to be involved, but they're in shame, they're really struggling, and they withdraw instead. So that, it's both people will be present in your church or in your ministry, in the people who you serve. They withdraw, but they don't want to be alone. They really need you, but they really don't know how to say it. And withdrawal is a way to hide. And oftentimes these people get missing in church. I'm listening to a lady, not from this country, from the UK, because I know other people are here and will be watching the replay, that she hadn't been to church for 5 months, and she turned up for Pathfinders recently, and they said, "Oh, how strange, a long time no see." Isn't that funny? Nobody had called her, nobody had gone to see her, nobody had sought her out, nobody had done anything. Now, she wasn't withdrawing because she was angry or anything like that. She was withdrawing because it's a trauma response. It's her coping mechanism, but nobody went after her. Okay, but hopefully from today, you knowing how to see and hear invisible wounds without it's being spoken can know that withdrawal is a response. I'm going to go search for them. I'm going to go find them. Okay. PTSD, mean post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm not going to go deep into that because that might be a webinar all on its own. What I'm going to say about that is I want to kind of talk about that in relation to people who have experienced abusive relationships or live in an abusive relationship can experience post-traumatic stress disorder even after they've left the relationship. So a smell, a sound, somebody who looks like might trigger some adverse reactions that might cause you to wonder what's going on. Okay. I have learned doing my clinical trauma training that PTSD cannot survive in a relaxed muscle body. And I just felt that was just like a key. That was just so amazing. So the person who is in the panic attack, when you breathe deep, take them outside, go for a walk, regularly take them for walks, regularly help them with exercise, regularly teach, learn grounding techniques so you can teach them. It minimizes the post-traumatic responses that they'll have. Okay. And just know that even after somebody has left an abusive situation, they can still experience it. That's all I wanted to say about that, because it's such a deep subject. We can't go all the way into it tonight. And sometimes prayer alone won't help. Now, I always have to qualify that. I'm not saying God can't help, because he's the only one who can help ultimately. But prayer on its own won't help, because God might want you to be the answer to the prayer. He might want you to do something about what you're seeing, what you're beginning to notice now. And he might want you to be able to help. In relation to abuse, 1 in 3 women will experience abuse and 1 in 4 men. And remember earlier I said in terms of sexual abuse, 1 in 4. So if you think about your church on a whole, I mean, that's about 3/4 of your church taken over with invisible wounds. So being here and being able to see it is just key, because you'll be able to see things now that you couldn't see before, and be able to help people in ways that maybe you couldn't do before. And this is sad for me, and maybe you don't know anybody who this has happened to, but being able to see it anyway is important. 2 women every week, and that was the statistics for Wales. 2 women every week die from domestic abuse. So when you're listening to a woman who that's her story, that's a big deal. So knowing where the refugees are, knowing where the services that works with women who have experienced abuse, knowing those things are going to be really, really important. Being a safe place is going to be very important too. And you might, be frustrated because you can't understand why she's not leaving, or, why don't she take the money and run that you've given her? But if she knows that you are going to be somebody who she can come to when it's tough and when she's made that decision, that's going to be invaluable. Oftentimes, and I'm coming towards the end so you can start asking questions. So start thinking about your questions. Oftentimes, this is what we say, we're faith in it. We're telling people, have faith, God's going to help you. A woman who is in an abusive relationship, faith is not the issue. The abuse is the issue. Or somebody who's experienced trauma, faith is not the issue. It's the effects of the abuse that is the trauma that's the issue. Brene Brown says, I thought faith would say, I will take away the pain and discomfort. But what it ended up saying was, I will sit with you in it. So are you able to do that for somebody who has experienced their traumatic experiences? And Joyce Huggett says, in our determination to guard the gospel and base our lives on biblical truth, we lost sight of compassion, that Christ-like quality without which much of our evangelism is at its best ineffective and at its worst crude. So if we can't have Christ-like compassion, all our evangelism efforts is wasted, because we're going to miss the people who come for the compassion of Christ and don't get it, and they leave frustrated, and very difficult to get them to return, because they're going to feel like, what's the point? Nothing can help me. So many people I hear say that. So let's look at listening to the heart, and what does listening to the heart looks like. Listening to that heart requires our full attention, and it's, if you kind of think of a 3D image, or it needs to be 3-dimensional, listening to the heart. So when we're listening to the heart, we're tuning, that's a small image. We're tuning into the words. So we're really listening to what somebody says, what kind of words are they using? Sometimes they're very selective in the words that they use. Sometimes they leave words out. Sometimes they leave important things out. Sometimes they'll answer in monosyllabic answers. Sometimes they'll avoid the open questions that you ask. There are many different things to tune into somebody's words, and listen to how they're choosing their words, how selective they're being when they're talking to you. When we tune into people, we're able to hear these things. When they select their words, you can think, hang on a minute, but I thought last week you said that, but this week you said this. But I thought this is what you said earlier on, but now it sounds like you've said something else, or it sounds like they're missing some things. I mean, I don't know about you. I like to solve puzzles, not puzzles itself, but like going, that that don't sound right. There's something wrong about what they've said, you know? Because sometimes when people are trying to hide their invisible wounds, they think it's visible. Okay. So sometimes when they're trying to hide, they'll be very selective in the words that they say, and sometimes they'll forget that they say one thing, and the story just won't add up. And you'll know that something is missing. And you'll know that, I think I can do something, but I think something is missing here. What's the missing piece? Let me give an example. This is the best one that comes to mind. I was listening to a man many years ago when I worked in addictions, and he had gone to prison. And he was just, reeling off how fascinating prison life was for him. And he was there for years. And I was listening to him going, wow, like, I didn't know prison was so fun to hear, that's the story he was telling me anyway. And he was telling me how he made, how he made alcohol and the things that he did and all of that. And then my next question on the assessment was, so why did you go to prison? And he said, I forgot. Now that told me a lot, because you can't remember how to make alcohol in prison, but you don't remember why you went. So for me, I filled the gaps in. And after the session, I rang the agency that referred him and said, well, why did he go to prison? Because he forgot. Of course we laughed, because we both know, I knew then why he went. So it's things like that. People will be selective in the words that they use. People will be selective in the things that they tell you, and there'll be a big gap, and you'll know that something is missing here. And that's how we can effectively listen to the heart and minister to what they haven't told us, but what we know is there. And that's when we go to Christ ourselves, to say, I see something is going on here. I don't quite know what it is, but I want to be able to help. Am I the person that you want to help? If it is, how do I help? And he will tell you how. Listening to the eyes. My slides were a lot bigger, and I don't know what happened. They shrunk. Listening to the eyes. The eyes are the windows to the soul, they say. So when someone is talking to you, and sometimes people laugh and their eyes are sad. It's just like there's a smile, but it doesn't reach their eyes. It doesn't reach their cheeks. The face is the same, not radiant. It's the same dull hue. That will tell you a story in itself. So you may not respond to it straight away or say anything, but it's something that you can, kind of make a note to yourself to kind of pay attention to this person, because the eyes are sad. The eyes are not shiny, or regardless of what's going on, there's no brightness in the cheeks or in the face. There's a young woman who started following our ministry a couple of years ago. She came to the first conference that we had online, and she followed and did several of our programs, and came to the first retreat and stuff like that. That kind of eyes she had. No hue in her, beautiful, she's really gorgeous, but no color, no light in the face, no nothing. So when you'll see her, though you'll see her beauty, there's just nothing in the face and the eyes. And fast forward, she attended more conferences and retreats, did some more stuff. Really active in ministry, this young woman is. And I saw her earlier this year, and the light was coming. The light had started to appear in her eyes, and I could see it in her cheeks, and I just thought, wow. So that was a journey that took a couple of years, but she was persistent, she was consistent. She had people who were showing up for her, and who were standing beside her, and who were supporting her. And gradually, the light is shining. So look at the eyes, listen to the eyes, listen to what the eyes are saying. It will tell you quite a lot. And it will give you an indication of what this person needs and what you need to do. Okay, body language is something else that you need to listen to. So somebody will speak to you and they will not do eye contact. They'll be like this, and you're talking to them. They will walk with kind of slump posture. Sometimes, their head will be in their shoulders. Sometimes they'll complain of back pain. That sometimes is because of the tenseness of always sitting down. There'll be no joy in the face. They will be sometimes even in the way they dress, the colors that they wear. And I mean, that's a deeper thing, but even the way that just how they carry themselves in general will tell you a lot about, you know, this person is struggling. I don't know what they're struggling with, but I can tell something is going on. I wonder what I can do to help. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast because I know I tend to talk really, really fast. We only have a few minutes left, so I want to give you a chance to ask some questions. So in summary, we've learned the things that cause past pain, how to listen effectively to invisible wounds. We learned to listen to past pain. We've learned to listen to the heart. We've learned to listen to the tone, the body language, the eyes, and we've learned to notice body language cues to notice, like the way the posture is, the way they dress, the facial expression, whether or not they can do eye contact, and those kind of things will tell you a lot that these people are struggling. And remember the statistics that we look at, the 1 in 3 women, the 1 in 4 men, the 1 in 4 who have experienced sexual abuse. I mean, just 3. So that would be like 3/4 of your congregation, 3/4 of the people in your youth group or the people in your ministry that would have had experiences that are invisible, that is not shown, and they need your help. They need your help to be able to see Christ's compassion. They need your help to show them what the gospel looks like. They need your help, that it's not just evangelism, that your heart is inclined to theirs, and you really want to be beside them. Now, I know that, you know, this webinar, this 1 hour is not enough. And, you know, this thing is so complex. I mean, I've been doing this for many years and I continue to learn. And there's so many places, so much more to do. So what's next for you? Can you go off and yes, you'll be able to learn to listen now. It's kind of like the person who buy a yellow Volkswagen thinking they're the only one, and then suddenly yellow Volkswagen appear all over the place. That's kind of what it's going to be like when you go back to your churches and to your ministries. You're going to see things that you've not seen before. So what's next for you? How can you help them in a deeper way? I'm glad you asked. We have a program. It's a self-study course. You can do it in your own time, at your own pace. And it's called Listening to Invisible Wounds. It's a compassionate approach to helping survivors of childhood trauma and abuse, which forms, we've just identified, 3/4 of your congregation. This Listening to Invisible Wounds is a labor of love for me, because as I said, as I go around and speak, I see these people, I hear them, I hear their hearts cry. I'll never forget the woman I spoke to in Portugal through a translator. And when I asked her, can you call the pastor? Can you go to your church? She got so angry because they left her alone in her grief. And she was in deep sorrow, and there was no one. No one had seen her wounds. So Listening to Invisible Wounds is a self-paced course. You can do it in your own time. There's no deadline to complete it. There is, your own time, and there is email contact for the first week of the course. The first week you take it, there's email support where you can email me and I'll answer your questions. I'm usually really hands-on when I run a program with people. If you have questions, you can always email it and I'll always make time. Sometimes I've even gone on the phone and speak to people to kind of work through a particular difficult area. And this is super affordable. I have reduced this like probably more than 97%. Wait until you see the price. And there's another bonus for a church who wants to do this Listening to Invisible Wounds program. There's a 1-month consultation from me for the first church who purchased the license for their team. So for the first church who purchased the license, now the license we can discuss in a separate way, because when you purchase the license, that means your women's ministries can take the course, your elders can take the course, your children's ministries can take the course, especially children's ministries. This is more than safeguarding. It's being able to, what do we do after somebody discloses? You notice how serious I got, because schools are doing this. So really, churches and ministries need to catch on and do something. So when you get a license, everybody who's in leadership in your ministry or in your church will be able to take the course. So for the first person, for the first church or ministry who purchase a license, and if you want to purchase a license, please email me at joanna@wonttoscars.com. So that's joanna@wonttoscars.com, and we'll discuss the licensing agreement. Okay. And you'll get 1 month free consultation. I'm going to be walking alongside you to implement some of these things among your leadership team. Okay. So that's the site that you can go to purchase the course. So that's wounds-to-scars.teachable.com/p/listening-to-invisible wounds. But of course, it's there on the screen, so you can see it on the screen. So I'll give you a few moments to write it down. It's going to come up again. Okay, so the investment is only £94.80. Only £94.80, and you have it for life. And whenever I run the course again, I upgrade it. I'll always send an email to say, hey, I've updated this module. I've put some new research in. There's some new information available. You're always going to have it. I mean, this course is sold for £479. But for this webinar and available throughout this week, it's only £94.80. That's a massive, massive discount. When I looked at the price this afternoon, I thought, really, do you want to do that, Joanna? Because I know how much I'm pouring into it and how much I've poured into it and how much it's going to benefit you and the way you serve people from now on. So that's the site again that you can go to get the information for the course. So that's wonttoscars.com /p/listening-to-invisible-wounds. Or you can email me to discuss licensing at joanna@wontstoscars.com. Okay, right. So if you have any questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can ask the question. You can come off mute and ask them by audio. You're also going to get the recording for this evening, so you can have, you can watch it again in your own time. Please do not share it with, well, actually you can share it. Doesn't matter. You can share it. You can share it. People can see it, but you will get the link to watch the replay. So if you have any questions, put the questions in the chat. For those who are watching the replay, if you have any questions, just email them to joanna@wonttoscars.com. Any questions? Was everything clear? Can you still hear me? Okay. Thank you for coming. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for coming. Any questions from anyone? If there are no questions, that's fine. We'll just awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey.
Uh-huh.
What I want to ask was on getting people to talk without them feeling like you're barging into their privacy.
Right.
That can be very difficult at times.
Yes.
So yeah, I understand we went through it, but like you spoke about uncomfortable silence. You can actually something is happening, but maybe they're not even your friends, but you can see something is just wrong there.
Yeah.
They are concerned, genuinely concerned.
Yeah, and you're right. If it's somebody that's not your friend, it's difficult. But when you're serving in ministry, then there are ways to draw close to people. I always said that not many people can resist love. When you show love and compassion, not many people can resist this. So there are ways to show love, and there are ways to get close to somebody who you see is struggling, and you feel like you are the one that God wants to be able to help this person. So what's going on for them? Do they have children? Do they, if they have children, that's a really good way to draw close to them, to be able to help in some way. There are other ways to draw close to people. I'm thinking that how I've done it, but I'll say hello, I'll start a conversation, and I'll develop a relationship. When you have relationship with people, then it's easier. And I mean, when I say relationship, I don't mean you can't have close relationship with everybody, okay? But relationship in terms of where we are on more than hello, how are you? We can talk about the weather, we can talk about likes, we can talk about what you dislike. I will know if the dog has died or the mother is ill, or you know. So just go close to the person and talk to them. Just talk about anything. Start the conversation about something that you notice about them, like I love your hat, or I think that's a beautiful dress. You're always, you know, your colors are always so bright. Or just look for an opening. I found an opening with one woman by saying, that's a really nice bag that you have. And that was a way in to start a conversation, to develop a relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So find a way to, if you're serving them, like if they're in your women's ministries or if they're in a ministry that you're responsible for, find a way to draw close to them, and nobody can resist love.
Thank you.
And pray as well. If you know, like, God, I can see that something is going on here. Am I the person that you want to go? If I'm not the person that you want to go, who is it that you want to go? Please send someone if I'm not the person. Yeah. But that's a really good question. Anybody else? Any other question? If no, then we're gonna just call it a wrap and we're gonna head out. Okay. Right. I want to thank you all for coming. If you have any questions about the program, the Listening to Invisible Wounds, or if you have any questions about, let me see if it's there. I can put it in the chat. I'm going to put it in the chat. If you have any questions about the program itself, or any questions about the license, please email me at joanna@wontsoscars.com. I'm going to put the link for the course in the chat so you can go have a look at it. Okay, so I've put it. Why is it not doing it? Oh, I was doing it to one person. It needs to be to everybody. Okay, there, it's in the chat. So yeah, just click on that link, or you can email me if you have any questions. I want to thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for watching the replay. And I hope I'll see you inside Listening to Invisible Wounds. Take good care.